let's be real for a sec. How often do you find yourself like scrolling through social media and it's all like good vibes only, living my best life, and you're like, is this thing on? Am I the only one not having this like amazing, perfect experience all the time? It's this constant pressure to be happy like 24/7.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that chasing happiness all the time, like nonstop, could actually be kind of holding you back?
Interesting.
Today, we're diving into this idea that maybe, just maybe, a fulfilling life, a really good life, isn't about being happy all the time. What if it's more about learning to, like, ride the waves, embrace those natural rhythms of highs and lows?
You know, you're hitting on something there, because that idea really gets at how our brains actually work.
Okay.
Like, we're actually designed to notice differences, to look for contrast, to
Yeah.
really,
I'm intrigued.
yeah, well, think about it. Like, how do our senses work?
Okay.
We need shadows to even see depth. We need silence to even appreciate sound, right? I mean, without those moments of quiet, how could we fully appreciate, like, the crescendo of our favorite song,
Right.
or, a symphony?
That's a really good point.
And it's the same with emotions, I think. Like constant sunshine. If every day felt like sunshine,
Yeah.
it would lose its meaning, right?
Totally.
You need the rain. You need the contrast.
It's like if every day was a beach vacation, eventually you'd be like, okay, I'm over it. I
Exactly.
actually need something else.
Exactly.
And that actually reminds me of the source we're looking at today. They use this really interesting analogy of a sound wave
Okay.
to kind of illustrate this point.
I like that, yeah. The sound wave, yeah. Well, what about it?
So they're saying without those valleys, those dips in the wave, we wouldn't even recognize the peaks, right?
Right.
Those moments of joy or accomplishment, we need those lows to even perceive the highs. Have you ever, like, noticed that in your own life? Where it's
Yeah.
like sometimes it's those challenging times that make the good times feel even sweeter.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right.
Yeah, like, think about a photographer, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't just point the camera at, like, the brightest part of a scene.
Right.
They use shadows, and they use contrast to create depth, to highlight what's really beautiful about what they're taking a picture of,
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with our lives, Those low moments, they're not failures. They're part of the journey. They add depth, they add richness.
Yeah.
It makes the whole picture, the whole experience much more vibrant.
Wow. That's a really beautiful way to look at it. So instead of chasing this like constant happiness, it's more about recognizing that every experience, even the tough ones, they're like adding to the bigger picture. They're not meaningless. They're not
Yeah.
They're not pointless.
Exactly.
So how does this idea of embracing the whole wave, how does that actually play out in our lives?
Well, that's where this whole concept of what they call the law of rhythm comes in, which this source really dives into.
Okay, so let's unpack this law of rhythm a little bit, because
Yeah.
I think that's a really juicy concept.
What they're essentially saying is that everything moves in cycles,
Yeah.
right? I mean, think about it. The seasons,
Seasons.
they
Yes.
move in cycles, right?
Yeah.
The economy booms and busts.
Okay.
Even our own energy levels, throughout the day, we have peaks and valleys.
Totally.
And so what this source is saying is fighting against that natural rhythm
Right.
is like swimming upstream.
Yeah. Exhausting.
It's exhausting. It's futile.
And it's interesting because I feel like, especially in like modern Western society, we're obsessed with control, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like we want to control every aspect
We think we can.
of our environment, of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking we need to be on like all the time,
Right.
performing, producing. And I remember this source had this quote about creativity. And it was saying that real creativity is about surrender, not control.
Wow.
And that really struck a chord with me because I was like, oof,
Yeah.
that's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that desire for control that you're talking about, it leads us in some interesting directions, I think.
Right. Like sometimes that need for control, it's not even helpful anymore. It
Exactly.
becomes like detrimental.
It could become a problem in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah, it's like we build these elaborate sandcastles,
Right.
and we're trying to control every little grain of sand.
Yeah.
And then the tide comes in
And it's like, oops.
and it just washes it all away. And the source is saying, real freedom
Okay.
is in surrendering to that rhythm.
Okay.
To letting go of the need to micromanage every little thing.
I love that analogy of the sandcastle because it makes me think about, what we were talking about earlier, those low moments actually being opportunities for growth. But if we're
Right.
so busy, like clinging to control, white knuckling it,
Right.
we don't even allow ourselves to actually experience those moments, to actually learn from them.
Yeah, totally. It's about learning to, like, dance with it a little bit,
Okay.
right? Embrace the ebb and flow
Yeah.
instead of, forcing everything to fit into our own, like, rigid little plan.
Right.
And I think this is where, it's helpful to ask, like, what are we holding on to too tightly in our own lives? Is it a fear of failure?
Yeah, that's a big
Is
one.
it a need to please everybody?
Oh,
You know, what what could become possible if we loosened our grip a little bit?
that's such a good question. And it makes me think about like how often, that attempt to control is actually leading to more suffering.
Well, absolutely.
Because the reality is we can't control
We
everything,
can't control
no
it.
matter how hard we try.
And we try.
They do.
We
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah, and that's when we experience the most resistance.
Right.
I mean, think about it in terms of like physical health,
Yeah.
right? If you push yourself too hard, you don't get enough rest, you're going to get injured,
Right.
right?
They're going to burn out.
It's about finding that balance between, effort and surrender. Pushing your limits, but also like honoring when you need to rest.
Right. Honoring those rhythms.
Yeah. It's like that old saying, what you resist persists.
Oh, I love that
The
one.
more we try to like force things,
Right.
the more resistance we're creating.
Absolutely.
And this source talks about this concept. And I have to admit, at first it sounded a little woo-woo, even for me.
Yep.
They call it quantum forgiveness.
Interesting.
And I was like, quantum? Like, what are we talking about here?
I think it's a really powerful idea.
Okay.
And it really speaks to this idea of like how when you surrender control in one area, how it can open up all this other stuff.
Okay, I'm listening. Yeah, tell me more.
It's like this doorway.
Okay.
So break it down to it. What is quantum forgiveness?
Yeah, because it sounds like we're like time traveling or something.
It's not about time travel.
So?
No. It's more about like shifting your perspective on past hurts
Okay.
in a way that allows you to move forward.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about like contrast being essential for perception?
Yeah.
It's like applying that to your emotional life.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It's
Yeah.
like we need those darker experiences in
Yeah.
order to fully appreciate the light.
Right.
So how does that apply to forgiveness?
Okay, so think about it this way. When we hold on to anger or resentment towards someone, maybe even ourselves,
Oh, yeah.
you're basically holding on to the past.
We're letting it live rent-free in our minds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're replaying these things over and over.
Yeah.
And you're allowing it to have power over you, like right now,
Right.
in this moment.
Yeah.
Quantum forgiveness, what it does is it says, okay, how do we approach those past hurts from a place of observation, right?
Interesting.
Not judgment, but observation.
So instead of being like stuck in that victim role of like, this happened to me and it's not fair,
Yeah.
it's more like we step back and we become like the observer.
Right.
We're like, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I use this to grow?
That's exactly it. And it's not about like condoning the action.
Right. It's not about saying what happened was okay,
No.
but it's how we're choosing to react to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about them. It's about you.
Oh,
And this source, they give this example of like, someone wrongs you in some way,
okay.
right? And instead of dwelling on like the anger and the resentment, quantum forgiveness is about saying, okay, how is this a learning opportunity?
Wow. Okay.
How can I grow from this experience?
That's a really powerful reframe.
It is.
And it makes me think about something else this source talks about, this idea that everyone is on their own journey.
Right.
Everyone's fighting their own battles.
Totally.
So just because someone acts in a way that's hurtful towards us,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean it's a reflection of our worth.
Exactly.
They may be dealing with their own stuff.
They got their own stuff going on.
Right. Like we don't know.
You don't know their story.
And it's so easy as humans to just go immediately to that place of taking it personally.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
But when we can kind of zoom out a little bit
Right.
and see the bigger picture, it can be really freeing. This whole conversation has got me thinking about how like we resist change even when ultimately it's probably for the best,
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
change is
It's scary.
It can be really uncomfortable and can be kind of scary.
Absolutely.
And I remember this source, they use this really powerful phrase. They say, destruction precedes transformation.
Oh.
And when I first read that, I was like, whoa, that's intense.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense.
Right.
So it's like we need to clear out the old stuff
Yeah.
to make space for the new.
You got to tear down to build up.
Exactly. Like we can't build on top of a foundation that's like crumbling.
Right.
We gotta clear it out.
Yeah, get rid of the old outdated stuff.
So what are like some of those things that we might be holding on to that are ready to be kind of like released or maybe even destroyed to make way for something new?
Well, it could be old patterns, like
Uh-huh.
ways of thinking, ways of behaving.
Oh, yeah, like those habits that aren't serving us anymore.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It could be beliefs,
Oh, yeah.
like limiting beliefs that we've been carrying around for like who knows how long.
That we've like outgrown.
Right, that we've outgrown that no longer serve us.
Yeah.
It could even be, relationships.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, that have run their course.
It's about creating that space, right? For growth.
Absolutely, yeah.
For new things to come in.
Yeah, for reinvention.
It's like that old saying, you can't put new wine into old wineskins, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes we need to let go of what's no longer working to make room for something better.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is. And it makes me think about like the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly.
Ooh, yeah.
Like that's a messy process.
Oh, yeah, it's not pretty.
It's not pretty, but what emerges from that cocoon is something so beautiful and
Really?
so completely different.
Completely transformed.
Transformed. And it strikes me that that's a great metaphor for this whole process of like riding the waves, embracing those rhythms.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to emphasize here that this is not about being passive.
No.
It's not about just being like, okay, life, do whatever you want to me.
Right, like I'm just going to lay here.
This is not about giving up.
Yeah.
The source is not advocating for that at all.
Right. This isn't about resignation.
It's about recognizing that, like, okay, we can't always control what happens to us,
Right.
but we can control how we choose to respond.
We can control how we show up.
How we show up, exactly. And I love how this source ends because they leave us with this really powerful question, and it's, how will you show up?
Ooh.
Not just in the highs,
Yeah.
but in the lows.
That's the real question.
Right, because it's in those moments when things are tough, when things feel maybe even a little destructive,
Yeah.
that we really have that opportunity to tap into our resilience,
Yes.
our creativity, our capacity for growth.
It's where the good stuff is.
It is. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I hope that you're left with this image of like life as this series of waves.
Oh, I like that.
Some waves are towering.
Yeah.
Some waves are gentle.
Right.
But they're all part of this like magnificent,
It's all connected.
ever-changing ocean, right?
Yeah.
And we can't control the tide,
Right.
but we can learn how to surf.
We can learn to ride those waves.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the key to not just surviving,
Right.
but truly thriving
Thriving, yeah.
is in embracing that whole ride.
The whole thing, yeah.
The highs, the lows,
That's the-
downs,
right.
and everything in between.
That's where the juice is.
And, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this deep dive, this idea that destruction often precedes transformation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to leave you with this question. What needs to be released or destroyed in your own life to make way for something new? What's ready to be let go of? What might you discover on the other side of letting go? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.